This section is all about figuring out the emotional game of learning and taking action on that learning. So in later parts of the course, we'll be going over systems, strategies, how to plan things out, how to get very detailed into the metrics. So if you're a systems person and you love that stuff, you love really getting into the details and seeing, okay, how do you work this out? How do you plan this out? How do you make it so it's part of a system that consistently works and stays organized so that you can be efficient? That stuff is all really good. The problem is if you don't have the fuel in the tank in order to utilize that system, it's worthless. So you may have a Ferrari in the garage, but if you can't get any fuel into that tank, you can't drive it anywhere. So it doesn't really matter how good of a system you have, whether it's a Ferrari or it's a bicycle. You're not going to be able to go anywhere if you don't have fuel. So that's why this first section we're focusing on the emotional game, which means how do you get yourself motivated? How do you keep yourself motivated? How do you get into the flow? Because that's where you're going to get your best performance and your best results. So the idea here is building the action reflex. And the idea is you shouldn't be forcing yourself to take action, especially when you're in a compromised state. What a compromised state means is any time where you're not feeling good because of maybe you're just sick, or you didn't eat good food, or you're just tired, or you're stressed out about something, or you've got a lot of other things on your plate. Because, and we talked about this before, it all comes down to feedback loops. So what can happen often is you'll get really excited about implementing a new strategy or putting something into action that you just learned. And you'll force yourself to do it. And those first few days, you're excited about doing it. So you have a temporary feedback loop that says, I'm really excited about doing this. Take a little bit of action, do that first step in that habit, and you feel good. But eventually you bump up against all that friction. So all the reasons why you don't want to do that new habit or that new action, and eventually you run out of steam. The only way to consistently have energy is to be motivated from the deepest level, which is your emotional needs, your human emotional needs, what drives everybody to do what they do. So part of that's going to be figuring out why do you do what you do right now, and then figuring out how can you build a new feedback loop so that you're meeting those emotional needs with the new actions that you're taking. So ultimately what you need to do is build these action feedback loops, and your body is going to tell you based on how motivated you naturally feel how much you've successfully built that feedback loop. And if you don't build the feedback loop, you're not going to consistently take action. You're only going to be successful if you consistently take action. And sometimes you're never going to be motivated to do something. So the best thing to do in that case is to delegate it to somebody else. So we'll talk briefly about that later in the course as well. But it's very important that you're thinking every single action, it really needs to be a feedback loop. There needs to be an anticipation of some sort of reward at the end of it. And we're going to talk about how to build those. Some things are going to work by building small daily habits. Other things are going to be a one-time big project where you dedicate a big chunk of time for it. But at the beginning, a good way to make this something that you definitely do and definitely happens is make it a small daily habit to take action on something that you learned. Just carve out some time. Figure out what's a trigger point. What's something that consistently happens every day. A great way to build a trigger is to take something that you really like to do and then say, I'm not going to do that until I first take care of this other thing, before I first take some sort of action for 15 minutes or half an hour, set a timer on your phone and get it done. Another big thing is limiting your focus. So what I said before about being in a compromised state, if you're not focused, you're going to get overwhelmed because there's too much stuff and your brain can't handle it all. What's basically happening is your working memory can't hold all of that. So it's like when you got a bunch of programs, bunch of tabs open on your computer, and it just slows down to a crawl and the fans start going faster and faster because it just can't handle it. So you've got to close down some of those things so that your computer can focus on a few things and do those quickly. Same thing with your brain. You need to make sure you're constantly aware of how full is my working memory. And the way you stay aware of that is you just pay attention to your body. It's not something where you'd be like, make a list of all the things you're thinking about or anything like that. You just keep a focus on your body. What is your body telling you? You're going to notice that your body starts to heat up and you start to sweat These are basic hormonal responses to when adrenaline starts pumping in your vein. That's that your fight or flight. You start getting fear, feeling that fear emotion because you don't know how to handle all the problems that you're trying to deal with right now. That's that overwhelm. So those having too many problems causes to overwhelm your working memory. You feel like you can't handle it, and then the adrenaline starts to pump. And so you need to become very acutely aware of how your body is changing. So when you start to feel like maybe I'm getting overwhelmed or this, you just start getting annoyed, pay attention to your body so you start to understand and feel that cycle and become more aware of it so you can catch it at the earliest stages. So you find out something's happening, you take a short break, you do something else. One of the best things you can do is just stop, write down all the things you're trying to figure out on paper, just do a brain dump, basically dump all of that stuff out of your working memory onto a piece of paper. And then once it's on a piece of paper, you can handle that information much more easily, prioritize it, organize it, and then go back to focusing on one or two things. So there's a great metaphor for this is a plugin that you should, if you don't already have, make sure you get it, whether you're using Firefox or Chrome. I think it's on Safari also. It's called OneTab. So you got 20 tabs open in your window. You just press this one button. It'll close all the tabs and it'll put them in a list in this one tab called OneTab. So you just have one tab open and it'll show you a list of all the links that you had open, all the tabs you had open in that last session. You can click on a single one of them or you can restore them all. You can even share them with other people. So it's the exact same thing. You got a bunch of stuff, it's too much to handle, put it all in a list and then prioritize it, figure it out one at a time, and then make sure you're staying focused on one thing at a time. So all of this ultimately comes down to set the stage, set the environment, reduce the stress, get rid of that overwhelm so that when that motivation strikes, you're ready to go. And sometimes that motivation strikes by there's a small problem. And instead of being overwhelmed by that small problem, you go into the zone of, okay, I can take care of this right now. I can focus on this. I can take something that I've learned, or I can go out and learn something and take action on it. When you're constantly at the breaking point, and it's like, let's say I have a gig of RAM, if you're constantly running at 950 megabytes, you're always within that zone of you're about to crash, you're about to get to the point where you're overloaded. So a big part of making sure that you can take action on things is bringing that down so that you have a nice big chunk of working memory that can handle a problem hitting you and it's not going to knock you off the road. You're still going to be able to go. So it's important to keep your working memory at a good level. And what that means is stop multitasking. Turn off your phone. Turn off email notifications. Check your email twice a day instead of every single minute. Turn off text messaging. Get that phone away from you. Put it on the other side of the room. Put it in a different room. Put it on airplane mode for certain times during the day. Turn off notifications on your computer for things. Stop spending so much time on social media. All of those things are going to reduce the amount of clutter in your working memory. All those companies, all those services, they want you to use their services. They want to be part of your working memory, but you've got to shut those things down. You've got to eliminate those or drastically reduce them so it's on your time control. It's on you've got a certain habit, you've got a certain routine, and you can check in on those things, but you're not always going there. You're not always filling whatever little margin of working memory that you have left with all this other stuff, because what that does is it keeps you in a constant anxiety, constant stressed out state. And when you're in that state, it's very hard to solve new problems. It's very hard to do anything for the first time or do anything new that you haven't done before, where there's the potential for other sub problems to pop up. So you're trying to do one thing and then there's an error and you have to fix that error before you can continue, and all these other things pop up that you couldn't have predicted. Well, you got to make sure that you're not constantly in that state, because otherwise lightning is never going to strike, because it's always going to be, the conditions are never going to be right for you to get excited about something and continually reinforce that feedback loop by making a small amount of progress, and then maybe a small problem comes up, you fix that, you make some more progress, you feel good again. Each of those steps of doing a little bit more, feeling better, doing a little bit more, getting another emotional reward. That's what's building the feedback loop. But what breaks that feedback loop is if you do something good, you make a little progress, you do something good, you get that reward, you do something, make some more progress, feel good again, make some progress, goes sideways. This is a new problem that you weren't expecting. You get overwhelmed. You're like, oh crap, I'll go to Facebook and I'll check my email and then I'll come back to this. You end up not coming back to it, and now you've associated a negative feeling of overwhelm to continuing on that project and taking action. So that's a big problem, and the only way you can fix that is if you set up the right environment, the right system. So we're going to talk about the systems of, okay, what do you write down? How do you keep a calendar? How do you keep everything organized? How do you plan for action? But that's not the only environment we have to work about. That's the kind of logical problem solving aspect of it. The other part of it is the emotional game, which is building these feedback loops and also avoiding building negative feedback loops where you actually associate negative emotions to taking action. So it's always going to be those two things, those two sides of the coin, looking for how do I build a positive feedback loop where I get a reward for doing the right thing, and then also how do I avoid building a negative feedback loop where I associate pain to taking action. So that's what this course is about. It's about those two things, the emotional game of it, how to build those feedback loops, and then also what is the strategic planning side of it. And when you marry those two, you're never going to feel like you're a slave to this logical system of how you've planned things out, but you don't feel like doing things. You're also not going to be over in la la land where you don't have any structure and you're just motivated to do stuff, but it's like you're running in place and not really going anywhere. So it's marrying the two. There's a ton of people out there that have tons of great strategies, tons of apps and tools and things on their phone and their computer, but they never actually implement it because they never figured out that emotional side to it. So I really wanted to start this course talking about this because a lot of people focus on one side or the other side. They never combine them together, and neither of those sides is going to work on its own. It's only when you combine those that you get the results that you really want.